You do realize this is embarrassing to watch, right? Trevor Boyce said it loudly enough for the entire open plan office to hear. Standing over the desk of the newest intern with his arms crossed, the way a man stands when he wants an audience for a lesson he's about to teach. The intern, a quiet man in his early 40s who'd introduced himself 3 months earlier as Nathan, sat with his hands still on the keyboard, a half-finished quarterly report open on his screen, and said nothing at all. 3 months, Trevor continued, shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. 3 months, and you still can't format a basic deck without me holding your hand through it. I've seen college freshmen pick this up faster. A few nearby desks had gone quiet, the specific quiet of people pretending to work while listening intently to a public dressing down they were grateful wasn't aimed at them. Nathan, which was not, in fact, his real name, closed the laptop gently and looked up at Trevor with an expression that held no visible resentment, only a kind of patient, almost clinical attention. The look of a man taking careful notes rather than absorbing an insult. "I'll fix the formatting," Nathan said. "You'll fix it," Trevor repeated, with a short laugh directed at the rest of the floor, as though inviting them to share the joke. "That's what you said about the client summary last week. And the week before that. Honestly, I don't know how you made it through the interview process. I've started to wonder if HR just needed to fill a diversity quota on hires who can't actually do the job." The comment landed with an ugly specificity that made even the desks, pretending not to listen, visibly flinch, though nobody said anything. Trevor Boyce had built a 3-year reputation as the sharpest, most aggressively confident team lead at Holloway Analytics, the kind of manager whose numbers were good enough that HR had, on more than one occasion, quietly filed away complaints about his management style rather than acting on them. Nathan absorbed the comment, the same way he'd absorbed everything else over the past 3 months, without visible reaction, without escalation, simply nodding once and returning his attention to the laptop he'd just closed. However, neither Trevor Boyce nor anyone else on that office floor had the faintest idea that the intern they'd spent 3 months treating as the department's designated underperformer was, in fact, Nathaniel Holloway, the founder and controlling owner of the entire company, whose name was on the building, and that his quiet, deliberate 3-month experiment in humiliation was about to end in a way none of them saw coming. Nathaniel had built Holloway Analytics from nothing over 18 years. Growing it from a 4-person consulting shop into a data analytics firm with client contracts across 3 continents. Somewhere around year 14, he'd started noticing a pattern in the anonymous employee satisfaction surveys his HR department dutifully compiled every year, and just as dutifully failed to meaningfully act on a recurring, vague unease about certain team leads, complaints that never quite specified enough to warrant action, exit interviews that mentioned culture issues without naming names. He'd asked HR to investigate directly. The investigations had come back clean, every time, because employees under an aggressive manager rarely feel safe giving honest answers to a corporate investigator who reports, eventually, back up the same chain of command as the manager in question. So Nathaniel had decided, 18 months ago, to stop asking people to tell him the truth and start finding it out himself. He'd used a distant cousin's identity, documents with the cousin's full knowledge and consent, built a modest resume that would plausibly land him an entry-level analyst internship without raising flags, and placed himself, deliberately, on Trevor Boyce's team, the team that had generated the highest number of vague, unresolved complaints in the company's satisfaction surveys for 3 consecutive years running. He'd expected some friction. He hadn't fully expected the specific, casual cruelty of the comment about diversity quotas, delivered loudly enough for an entire floor to hear, aimed at a person Trevor believed had no power to do anything about it whatsoever. That, as it turned out, was the exact piece of information Nathaniel had spent 3 months waiting for. He didn't respond to Trevor in the moment. He finished his shift, reformatted the deck exactly as instructed, and went home to draft, with considerably more care than any quarterly report he'd reviewed in years, a full account of the past 3 months, not just Trevor's comment about diversity quotas, though that alone would have been sufficient grounds for termination in most reasonable HR departments, but the accumulated pattern, the public the selective assignment of impossible workloads to specific employees, the pointed comments about accents and backgrounds that Nathaniel had watched Trevor deliver to at least 4 different team members over the preceding months, always calibrated carefully enough to avoid an obvious formal complaint, always just plausible enough to be waved away as tough management. 3 months of documentation. Dates, direct quotes, witnesses. The company's annual general meeting was scheduled for the following week, a mandatory, all-staff event where Nathaniel, in his actual capacity as founder and CEO, traditionally gave a short address about the company's direction for the coming year. Trevor had attended 4 of these in his 3 years at Holloway Analytics, always seated near the front, always nodding along enthusiastically at whatever the CEO said, entirely unaware that the CEO in question had spent the last quarter of a year sitting 3 desks away from him. absorbing every word Trevor directed at the department's newest, quietest hire. Nathaniel walked onto the stage that morning in a suit, not the plain button-downs he'd worn for 3 months, as Nathan the underperforming intern, and the recognition rippled through the room in a slow, uneven wave as people began, one by one, connecting a face they'd walked past in the break room to the man now standing at the podium. Trevor, seated in his usual spot near the front, went very still. Some of you, Nathaniel began, have spent the last 3 months working alongside someone named Nathan. I want to thank you for that. Genuinely, most of you treated him with basic decency, which apparently, in this company, has become something worth thanking people for, instead of simply expecting. A ripple of uncertain laughter moved through part of the room, quickly dying when nobody could tell if laughing was the right response. Nathan was me, Nathaniel said simply. I spent 3 months as an entry-level intern on Trevor Boyce's team, specifically because this company's satisfaction surveys have flagged unspecified concerns about his management style for 3 consecutive years, and every internal investigation into those concerns came back clean. I wanted to know why. Now I know why. Trevor's face had gone the specific shade of pale that comes from watching an entire career recalibrate itself in real time. I'm not going to read every comment I documented over the past 3 months, Nathaniel continued, his voice even, without theater, without the performative disappointment Trevor himself had specialized in. But I will read one, because I think it matters that everyone in this room hears it exactly as it was said 3 days ago, in front of an entire floor of people who said nothing because they reasonably assumed nothing they said would change anything. He read the comment, word for word. The room went entirely, uncomfortably silent. Trevor Boyce was terminated that same afternoon, along with a severance package structured carefully by legal counsel to avoid any wrongful termination claims. Given the 3 months of meticulously dated documentation, now sitting in Nathaniel's own handwriting, what happened after was, in its own way, more significant than the termination itself. Nathaniel restructured the company's entire complaint process, building in an anonymous third-party reporting system that didn't route back through the same management chain being reported on. He instituted mandatory skip-level check-ins, where employees met quarterly with someone 2 levels above their direct manager, specifically designed to catch exactly the kind of pattern that 3 years of clean internal investigations had missed. He didn't do all of this from the podium, or with any further public spectacle. Most of it happened quietly, in policy documents and HR restructuring memos that most employees never read, closely enough to connect back to a 3-month experiment that had briefly made an office floor's newest, quietest hire the subject of considerable gossip. Nathaniel still occasionally walks the office floors unannounced, though considerably less disguised than his 3 months as Nathan. He's said, in interviews since, that the experience taught him something no satisfaction survey ever could, that the people most confident about their own management style are often the ones most skilled at ensuring nobody with actual power ever witnesses it directly. I built the company on the assumption that good numbers meant good leadership, he says. When the story comes up, which it does, periodically, whenever a new hire eventually connects the dots about who Nathan really was, it took becoming the person with the least power in the room to understand how wrong that assumption had been. If you believe that the way someone treats people